Backing Aston Martin for an early upset in 2023 was the hottest take from Formula 1 pre-season testing. But could it be the real deal, or is it, as Aston Martin team boss Mike Krack suggested, just a bit like playground rumours? There's good reason to view this team as the big wildcard of F1 2023. If its testing form is an accurate predictor, then Aston Martin is a huge threat to the established order. But even if that proves to be slightly overblown, Aston Martin could still achieve something big. Aston Martin's headline numbers from 3 days in Bahrain were nothing stunning. It was the 7th fastest team and completed a reasonable but unspectacular number of laps. The hype comes from elsewhere. It's the car's behaviour on track, the ultra impressive long run on the final day, and the impression that star signing Fernando Alonso is excited about what might be possible this season that made people talk about the AMR23 in such glowing terms. The most aggressively positive interpretation of Aston Martin's test is that it may start the season clear of the midfield and as a genuine threat to two of the established big three. Raw long-run analysis suggests Aston Martin was a couple of tenths faster than Mercedes and on par with Ferrari. This has all been downplayed by the team, with Krack suggesting it was flattered by track conditions and that Aston Martin was not going to start dreaming. He and Alonso have said there are no miracles in F1, but a high-performing Aston Martin would not be a miracle. There are logical reasons it can make a big step. Aston Martin has under-delivered in the last couple of years, and its new approach for 2023 is the first car overseen from the very start by major Red Bull recruit Dan Fallows, so it arguably had more scope than any team to improve. And that, combined with McLaren being all at sea, Mercedes having a slightly confusing test, and Alpine looking a little enigmatic, adds up to at least a plausible set of circumstances in which Aston Martin could genuinely leap from 7th in the championship one year to being talked about as a top 3 candidate the next. That's at least true for the start of the season. Those teams, especially ones like Mercedes, have got more headroom in which to develop, given their grander resources and the fact they had a better 2022 car to work from. Maybe the real secret is that the Aston Martin is nearer to its ultimate potential after a bright start. And if that's the case, is it unthinkable for Alonso to fight for early season podiums? That doesn't necessarily mean qualifying 3rd or 4th or blowing apart the established order from the outset. But an Alonso-led Aston Martin on the first 3 rows of the grid and then using stealth or opportunism or raw Alonso determination to drag the car into a top 3 position if the circumstances allow it, well, that's just what McLaren was doing in 2021 with Lando Norris. So why couldn't Aston Martin and Alonso do that now? If Aston Martin is at the upper limit of the pre-season expectation, then there's the fascinating prospect of it achieving something McLaren and the Renault Works team have failed to do: bridge the gap to the big 3. That's been a near impossibility in modern F1, with a clear Class A, Class B split that had become more prominent at the start of the V6 turbo hybrid era in 2014 and then crystallised very clearly with the new car rules in 2017. Although things like Ferrari's massive 2020 slump and the peak of McLaren's revival in 2021 did allow for slightly closer final points tallies. With the exception of the occasional unsustainable interjection, for almost a decade there's been Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari, and then the rest. It was perfectly illustrated last year by the massive gap between the big 3 and the top of the midfield, with 4th placed Alpine finishing a whopping 342 points behind Mercedes in 3rd. F1 has subsections within those 2 groups though. This year it looks like 5 teams should control the points positions at the start of the season, and 5 teams will be trying to get into those positions. Class A is the big 3 teams plus Aston Martin and probably Alpine, and the gaps between Red Bull, Ferrari and probably Mercedes to those leading midfielders will get closer, especially given all the excitement of Aston Martin, maybe even gate crashing the established top 3. Then there is a gap to the secondary midfield group led by Alfa Romeo and Haas, and what looks like the back of the back group for now comprising McLaren, AlphaTauri and Williams. But let's also be realistic about Aston Martin. If the strongest start imaginable is achieved and it's causing problems for Mercedes or even Ferrari, it's going to be almost impossible to sustain it. The team is waiting for bigger and better facilities with its impending new factory and wind tunnel and the like. So the first few races may be the strongest part of the team's season before it fades and the natural order is restored. While it's fun to consider the prospect of an Alonso shock to the established order in Bahrain, it's important to stress that even if the season opener plays out with Aston Martin only the lead midfielder, that's still a really good effort and a brilliant foundation for what it wants to achieve in the coming years. There's a certain level of potential for that team at the moment, and if Ferrari, Mercedes, Alpine and even McLaren get 100% out of their respective resources, then they should all be ahead. Given it was only a second half surge that salvaged 7th for Aston Martin in the championship last year, getting ahead of one of McLaren or Alpine would represent a very good result this year. Getting ahead of both would be superb, and anything more would be a massive overachievement even by Team Silverstone standards as one of F1's great overachievers. One obvious problem for Aston Martin going into the new season is that it has been missing one of its drivers. Stroll was ruled out of the 3-day test by what the team claims was a bicycle accident in Spain, has suffered wrist injuries at least, and is said to have been treated by one of the best trauma doctors in Spain. As this was the only bit of collective testing before the new season kicks off and took place at the same Bahrain track that will host the opener, Alonso says Stroll's feedback was missed a lot. Alonso said that as he has moved across from Alpine, his own feedback could be impacted by what he knows from the different car he drove last year. This can be fundamental stuff like steering feedback or brake pedal feeling, and it basically means Alonso wasn't 100% certain if he was identifying a problem or just a point of difference between the Aston Martin and the Alpine. According to Alonso, as Stroll has been with this team since 2019 and is obviously very familiar with the 2022 Aston Martin, the Canadian would have been able to confirm what were new 2023 traits or issues that needed to be addressed. Alonso's comments could easily be seen as part of a wider strategy of ingratiating himself with his new team, given Stroll's father Lawrence is the executive chairman. And Alonso is the master of saying and doing all the right things to get life at a new team off to the perfect start. But his feedback from the test suggested that he was genuinely lamenting a lack of certain clarities. Though he said it was a very important, very nice week, he stressed that we feel there is a lot more to come from the car that we didn't have time yet to extract in testing. That is born from the fact the car is so different to its limited predecessor and a realisation that the AMR23 needs different things from the setup, which resulted in a lot of work over the 3 days as Alonso explored as many options as he could. In Alonso's words, it's a concern in a way because it means Aston Martin needs more time to optimise its package, and Alonso will be desperate to go into Bahrain as prepared as possible. Stroll's absence at least meant Alonso got 2 days of running, which was a small boost given Alonso was adamant the conventional day and a half wouldn't be enough. The 270 laps this allowed Alonso to complete was comfortably the highest tally logged by any driver during the 3 days. The remaining day went to Formula 2 champion Felipe Drugovich, who drove half a day at the start of days 1 and 3, so he basically did the daytime donkey work. Now Stroll has been confirmed as returning, he will be on the back foot and most likely not at 100% fitness. That could limit Aston Martin's ambitions as a team for the foreseeable future, putting the onus almost entirely on Alonso to deliver a giant killing start to the season, assuming of course that that's actually possible. If you want a quick recap before the 2023 season gets going, check out this video we made after testing where we ranked all 10 teams from worst to best.